now present For the Record.
This Labor Day weekend, we're taking an in-depth look at our state and country's workforce.
Workers are trying to advocate for their interests.
Plus, we check in on a Madison emergency response team 2 years after its start.
We're all able to work together under this common vision.
And we'll break down the child care discussion at the state capitol.
It affects everything.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm Catherine Merck, filling in for Naomi Coles. It's Labor Day weekend as we continue to see what seems like a trend of labor-related issues and conversations nationwide. We're taking a deeper look at how Wisconsin lines up. Joining me to talk about this is UW-Madison professor at the School for Workers, Michael Childers. Thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Getting started here, we just were talking about the jobs report that came out today. We're filming this on Friday. The jobs report that came out said that unemployment rose from 3.5 to 3.8%, and hiring unexpectedly picked up in August as employers added about 180,000 jobs, despite interest rates and inflation. So what do those numbers that we were just talking about look at in terms of how unemployment stands?
I'd say that the employment outlook is basically steady. You see a little bit of a blip up as a result of, well, there was a major employer loss in transportation, and the yellow trucking, despite the COVID money that they got, we're still not able to continue operations. But in general, I think the Fed is looking very carefully at this in terms of if they're going to need to raise rates again, or if the economy is kind of on track for a soft landing.
How does Wisconsin shape up in terms of unemployment compared to other states, and what could be credited to?
Well, I mean, nationwide, it's pretty close to historical lows, and it's the same here in Wisconsin as well. I mean, basically, employers continue to be seeking workers to fill positions that they have.
The jobs report also showed that wage gains are easing. Average hourly pay rose from 0.2% from July to August, the smallest gain in a year and a half. And measured over a year, the wages last month were up 4.3 from August of 2022% there. So what does that mean in terms of wages adjusting to inflation? That seems like a concern that a lot of people have in a lot of jobs, that my job is not adjusting to inflation. What are we seeing with the numbers?
I mean, again, you said it, there's still a gap between what workers have been able to get back in terms of their wages and where inflation's heading, which frankly is what the Fed wants to see in terms of making sure that wages are not inflaming additional inflation rates. So again, workers are still trying to get caught up, but that has eased significantly. So while it's anybody's guess what the Fed will do, that's probably an indicator that they shouldn't have to raise rates yet again at this point. So we'll
even though workers are, making these cries for higher wages, you don't think that maybe that's the right move to adjust to this?
Well, again, you have to really unpack the jobs report, but I mean, the quit rate is down as well, which means, again, the employment picture is becoming more stable for employers. And yeah, workers are hopefully trying to adapt to this new reality. And in a lot of labor actions, the primary goal is we need more money, right? We need to raise our wages to try to keep up.
I want to talk about now some of these strikes that we're seeing across the country and here in Wisconsin. In our state, we're seeing many labor unions. Examples locally include True Stage, Leinenkugels, and other local businesses in Madison that are going through these strikes. But then nationwide, we're seeing trends like the service and the creative industries on the picket line more and more. Why do you think this is happening? Why are we seeing this?
Well, in general, every one of these groups of workers has their own specific reasons, but I'd say the overarching thing is, again, you said it, workers are trying to advocate for their interests, and in those specific instances you talked about in Wisconsin, wage rates, et cetera, I think everybody was watching really carefully on the Teamsters and the UPS negotiation, because again, that's such a large group of workers that would have had such a huge impact on our economy, and they were able to, at the 11th hour, negotiate an acceptable agreement, which kind of avoided that disruption to the supply chains, et cetera. But yeah, workers are still trying, and then in the case of the kind of pending situation with United Auto Workers and the big three automakers, workers are saying, you guys are enjoying record profits. We should be sharing in that. We gave back a lot during COVID, and we would like to get that back.
I'm definitely going to address COVID in just a second here. But in terms of going back to these strikes that we're seeing, what does that mean in terms of union participation? I think a lot of people are seeing these on TV, these strikes, and thinking, wow, it feels like a lot of people are joining unions and getting their voice heard. Is that something that we're seeing, union participation up?
I think if we look at the NLRB numbers, the request for representation elections, in other words, groups of workers that are trying to form unions, has definitely gone up in terms of the number of petitions filed. I think there's been a lot more media coverage, frankly, since COVID in terms of the workers having the kind of their interests or needs being, put out in the popular media. But I guess I would say that's always been the case. I mean, in terms of workers will come together whenever they feel like, they're not getting a fair shake at their job.
Later in the show, our political reporter Will Keneally is going to address another state of child care bills making their way around the Capitol. That's an obvious big topic of discussion at the statewide level. Has a need for child care influenced the workforce and the trends that we're seeing right now?
Oh, there's no question. And that's been a long-term issue here in the United States with the kind of lack of any kind of systematic program. Yeah, it affects everything from participation rates in the workforce where, again, if you have to be the caregiver, and the cost is a real issue because, again, you have to do the calculus where, depending on the compensation I can receive at work, if I'm going to have to just hand it over to a child care provider that I can trust with my children, maybe I should be at home just taking care of my kids.
Something that you touched on a little bit ago, the COVID pandemic completely disrupted labor markets. You're laughing in the way that, yes, it disrupted everything.
Absolutely.
Unemployment has been trending downward since 2020, but what can we expect in the coming years as the state continues to recover from the events of COVID?
I mean, in a lot of sense, that's still getting unpacked. I would say that the one thing that's interesting that a lot of labor economists are still looking at carefully is the whole labor participation number, which is still, I mean, the jobs have essentially recovered, and employment, again, like we talked about, is historically low, which generally tends to favor workers, right? Because, again, they have options. And that we saw that kind of at the beginning part of coming out of the pandemic. That's starting to level off. But again, I mean, I think that there is really there's no way to understand how labor participation is going to continue to grow without addressing some of these concerns like childcare.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to For the Record. Friday marked 2 years of the Community Alternative Response Emergency Services within the Madison Fire Department. The CARES program was designed as a resource for behavioral health emergencies in the city. Joining us to talk about what's ahead for the program is Assistant Chief Chase Stedman. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So, getting started this morning, could you first start off by telling us what the initial program goals were when it was created 2 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the program was created as an alternative response to nonviolent behavioral health emergencies in the city, and it was an alternative to law enforcement responses, which has historically been, the kind of primary response for mental health emergencies, like it is in most cities. So we were tasked with, having a civilian team of a crisis worker and a paramedic to be a non-law enforcement response to these crises in our city.
Based on the 2022 annual report that came out, only 3% of CARES patients have been transferred to police. Can you tell me about the intentions behind that?
Yeah, well, we've been on over 3,200 calls now total. So those are calls that are more than 90% handled by the CARES team themselves. But we do work very closely with police. Being that some of these calls do involve weapons possibly or some sort of violent behavior, oftentimes in those cases, police will respond first. And then the CARES team will respond in and assist the police officers. Occasionally, the CARES team will respond first to a call and find something that law enforcement is needed for. For instance, protective custody for a person that is suicidal and has a plan. Those folks need care and oftentimes need police assistance for those things. So the CARES team has had to hand off patients to the police department for those more legal issues and protective custody.
Based on that same report, CARES has responded to a total of 935 calls in that particular year that was documented. So that's averaging 78 responses a month. How did that line up with what the department expected?
Yeah, it was hard to have really accurate expectations. We know the police department had gone on around 7,000 mental health related calls a year, and so we knew that there was a large volume of calls that we were going to have, but we had to start small so that we were thoughtful about the process that we were going through. You know, we did a lot of research around the country, making sure that what we were doing was best practice. So we started with our initial team just working in the Central Police District Monday through Friday from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. Just to kind of get our feet wet and make sure that we were doing was appropriate for our citizens. And since then, luckily, because we've had really good support of the City Council and the community at large, we've been able to expand. So the calls that we went on that first year were really with just one team. And since we've expanded to 2 teams, we've expanded the geographic area, and we've also expanded the different locations of the teams to be a more appropriate response to different parts of the city. So as we've expanded the size of our team and all those other things, our call volume has increased. So, you know, that first year was 935 calls. The second year we ran over 2,000 calls.
Okay. So then moving into this next year, there are 2 existing teams.
Yes.
The goal is to expand. What does that look like in the coming year?
Yeah, so actually on September 16th, so in just a few weeks, we're going to be expanding to weekend hours because currently our teams are working from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday. So this weekend expansion is going to allow us to provide services 7 days a week. And then later this year, we're hoping to add a 3rd team during the week, during the peak hours. And peak hours for us means that we know that there is a certain time of day that these types of calls generally happen, or the volume of these calls is much higher. So we try to put our folks in service during those times.
How do you feel about the progress over these 2 years overall?
I'm just really proud of our teams, honestly. You know, so the operations have gone great. We're the crisis worker and the paramedic, those teams are doing fantastic work and, you know, doing on-scene interventions, you know, de-escalating the situation and referring those folks to the appropriate resources in the community. You know, law enforcement officers did their best, but they were limited in scope to what they could do with these calls. And of course, they were bound by their badge and the laws that they had to defend and protect. And so for our team to be able to go out and use discretion on these calls and do really what's best for the patient is what I'm most proud of. But honestly, from my point of view, it's the fact that Dane County Human Services, Dane County Public Health, the fire department, the police department, the 911 center, the mayor's office, we're all able to work together under this common vision, which has been incredible because, as you can imagine, city government can be kind of clunky. A lot of city attorneys are involved in the program, but everybody really came together to make this happen, and that's what I'm really proudest for.
Okay, Chase Stedman, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to For the Record. Childcare has been a significant debate in the state capitol, in effect to try to get more young parents into the workforce. After months of Democrats pushing for more funding, Republicans introduced their own childcare proposal this week. Political reporter Will Keneally shares the perspective from both sides of the aisle.
Now let's take a look at how we got here. It started earlier in the spring where the governor wanted to extend a federal pandemic-era program, which provides direct funds to these child care centers. Now to extend the program, it would have needed state money, and Republicans later took that out during the budget process. Now earlier in August, the governor called for a special session in September to compel Republicans back into session to debate the issue. And just this last week, Republicans introduced their own plan. So included in the plan are provisions to raise the ratio of child care provider to children. Also to allow for child care savings accounts, essentially like healthcare savings accounts, pre-tax that people can use for child care. Now we spoke with one of the bill's authors, Representative Joy Gobin. She used to run a child care facility, and we started by asking her, what are these issues that impact the industry here in Wisconsin?
Not enough people working in child care. I think that causes increased expenses. You have to pay the ones who are there more money. That raises the rates, and people are having a really hard time paying for that for childcare.
We also touched on the specifics of each bill and whether they would get support across the aisle.
We need to get these conversations started, and a childcare savings account, that shouldn't be controversial. Allowing certified providers to care for the maximum amount that they are already certified for, whether or not the child is related, that really shouldn't be controversial. Creating a large family child care center, which allows an increase of 4 children with another adult, that really shouldn't be controversial. These are good ideas that should go forward, and let's find solutions for our childcare issues, not just shut down because I'm not in the right political party.
And we asked what this means for the long-term sustainability for the childcare industry here in Wisconsin.
Child care counts, we keep hearing that it was cut from the budget, but it wasn't cut from the budget. It was never in our state budget. It was a federal program that gave money to help us get through the pandemic strains. We also hear that we have a large surplus of money and we should use that to continue the program, but that surplus is one-time money, and child care counts isn't going to be sustainable. So we need to look and try to find solutions. I have had people say we have a broken child care system. So let's look at trying to find ways to fix that system. And unfortunately, from the Democrat side, I haven't heard of anybody who are trying. Let's look at the system itself and see, are there areas that we can help, that we can improve? It is a hard industry. I worked in childcare. I ran a childcare center for 10 years. I understand that it is wearing on you. But if we put supports in place that can help, instead of just putting money on it, I don't know that that's truly what's needed, because we need to fix the system.
On the other side of the aisle, we spoke to a Democrat who's been at the center of the child care debate here in the Capitol, Madison Senator Kelda Roys. She says that the Republican plan is only an effort to deregulate the industry and does nothing to fund the child care centers themselves.
Childcare is incredibly important for our economy and our employers. We know that one of the main barriers that people have to employment or to being able to take on more hours or promotion is a lack of affordable childcare. We've had a long-running crisis in this state. In the last less than 20 years, we've lost more than half of our childcare providers. People in half the state are in a childcare desert, which means that there are 3 kids for every single slot that's available. It is the most important thing we could do to address our workforce shortage, to make sure that we stabilize the childcare industry and don't lose any more childcare slots.
So obviously you're a joint finance Dem. You've been through the whole budget process earlier this year. Why is the special session the right way to kind of tackle this issue now heading into the fall here?
Republican legislators stripped out funding for child care counts, which is the important program to stabilize the child care industry, during the budget process. Now we are seeing the impact around the state with child care centers saying that they are going to close if they don't get these funds. We cannot wait any longer. We need this issue addressed, and we can't wait for Republicans to come around on their own. I think that individual Republicans will hear from their constituents as families face radically increased costs or child care centers closing down. I think that Republicans will start to realize that they need to be responsive to this, or they will pay a political price for not doing so.
Hearings are expected on the bills next week. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We have one more story here today. A Wisconsin milk hauler has poured his heart and soul into his career, connecting people to the state's dairy farmers before his retirement. Our Brady Mallory shows us how he's just one half of a 100-year dairy legacy.
Every day, Tom Schwartz goes farm to farm.
This isn't bad. It's about 4,500 pounds of milk. It takes about 15 minutes.
To pick up white gold.
My last farm was 32,000 pounds of milk, so it took a long time.
The milk hauler helps carry Wisconsin's beloved dairy industry right to your tables.
Whenever I eat cheese, I just think, oh, maybe this came from my grandpa.
And after 50 years,
I haul 3 loads of milk a day, and it's 18 hours a day, every day. I get 1 day off every other Sunday.
Tom says
it's a lot. It's to the point where
he's ready.
Yeah, it's time
to stop.
It's time to give it up.
Tom loves his job, but it's not all black and white. He works hard and sacrifices holidays, vacations, sleep.
If I'm home by 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, that's a good day.
And he misses time with his family.
They always say the postman goes through rain and snow and ice and wind. Well, the postman's got Sundays off. Tom don't.
You could say milk hauling just flows through Tom's veins. After all, his dad, Melvin, also did it.
For 50 years.
So, if you're doing the math, Tom's 50 years plus Melvin's 50 years equals one family hauling dairy in Wisconsin for the last 100 years.
This is the first truck that I drove for my dad.
Over the years, Tom took over, and his old truck
Didn't run worth a crap.
got replaced. But what hasn't changed is how he treats his customers. His dad taught him that. Kalscher says the Schwartzes are practically family.
My grandparents started hauling milk with his dad, how many ever years ago that was. So then my dad took over this farm, and then now I took over this farm, and it's the only milkman we've ever had.
Tom says he learned a lot from his dad about the business and what's beyond it.
I remember the day he retired too, and my mom, they're both gone now, but she had said Dad got up and he sat at the kitchen table and he looked up at her and he smiled. He says, I don't have to haul milk today. It was just like a relief, you know, that he could actually sit down and enjoy life once.
Tom's retirement is well earned. And who knows, down the road, a certain passenger, his grandson, may be eyeing the driver's seat.
It's something I could see myself doing if I ever had the opportunity to.
When it comes to dairy, this milk hauler is ready to let it go. As for 100 years of a family legacy he shares with his dad, Tom Schwartz will carry that for the rest of his life.
It's going to be a little bit hard at first, but think of those mornings that I don't have to get up anymore. That'll be pretty nice.
For more on the child care discussions at the state level, the CARES program, and our state's workforce, you can recap today's conversations online at channel3000.com. Thank you as always for watching For the Record. I'm Catherine Merck. Have a great week.